months into one of the bloodiest wars in human history, something happened. 5 months into a war that would claim a little bit less than 20 million lives, something very remarkable happened. 5 months into World War I, on Christmas Eve in December 1914, roughly 100,000 German and British soldiers stopped shooting at each other. On Christmas Eve, they stopped firing their guns and their artillery. And on Christmas Eve, they shouted across the trenches to each other, "Merry Christmas." And then on Christmas Day, they woke up and they peeked their heads over those trenches at the enemy lines. And roughly 100,000 soldiers on those two different sides crawled out of their trenches, and they picked their way across the no man's land that was blasted by shells. And they shook hands, and they wished each other a Merry Christmas, and they exchanged what meager gifts they could cobble together on the front lines. Something rather remarkable. People in the midst of a war, in memory of the birth of the Prince of Peace, stopped their killing of each other for a day to have peace. In some places, the peace lasted a few days beyond December 25th. But in many places, it was back to business as usual. But in one of those places where the day after Christmas, war hadn't taken hold quite yet, a British soldier was sitting in his trench. And as he thought back on the previous day, the truce that had happened, he wrote this about the Germans who were in the opposite trench. "The beggars simply disregard all our warnings to get back down into their trench. So things are at a deadlock. We can't shoot them in cold blood. I cannot see how we can get them to return to business." Sad, isn't it? Sad that after having experienced a pause, a peace, an end to killing, the thoughts of that soldier were to get back to business, to the business of killing one another. And yet, even though that sounds a little bit surprising, it really isn't that surprising that someone would write that. It's not that surprising because isn't that true of our lives here on this earth? We look at peace as the unusual visitor, and we look at strife as the constant. I mean, how do we talk about going to work, getting up, going through all the stresses and struggles of life? We call that the daily grind, right? As if that's kind of the norm, just what we expect. You think of the work week. What's considered normal is going to work for the days of that work week, and what's considered kind of the abnormal break is the day or two that we get off from our job. In fact, students talk about Christmas break and spring break. The norm is to take the tests, to do the homework, to slog away at the papers, to take notes in school. The break is the peace, the release from that work. So often that's the way we look at life, isn't it? The hurt and the sorrow, that's the norm. And the spaces in between where we have peace, that's the unwelcome, maybe not unwelcome, but that's the unusual exception. And yet God says, no, that is not how it should be. And long before that Christmas truce of December 1914, a different truce was called. A greater truce, not a truce between two armies shooting bullets at one another, but a truce in a war between heaven and earth. A truce so significant that it was announced by angels. Angels sent to declare peace on earth and goodwill toward men. God announced a peace, an end to the war that, by the way, we were on the losing side of. As sinners, we were defeated. We were on our way to the ultimate prison. And God came down to earth himself to make that peace. He came in that little infant baby whose birth we celebrate to give us real peace. To give us a peace far better than any other peace that we could have ever known. Far better than any other peace that God had ever given in this world. Far better than the peace of a day of rest that he had commanded in the Old Testament. Far better than the peace of the rest of entering a promised land for the nation of Israel. That baby born in Bethlehem came to give a perfect peace. A peace that would never end. A peace that gives a home that is heavenly. God came to earth to give us a real peace. And so we can't help but go back to that place where that peace was declared. We can't help on Christmas Eve but go back to Bethlehem and to listen to that beautiful song of the angels, to hear that beautiful announcement, peace on earth and goodwill toward men. A lesson from Hebrews chapter 4. Since therefore it remains for some to enter God's rest, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David so long afterward, in the words already quoted, "Today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. This is the word of the Lord.